Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm a little sick, but I wanted to take some time today to talk about the rosters and a bit about the regions going into the Asia tournament for the OWCS. The first round of stuff is kind of underway. We've already gotten through the first portion of qualifiers and it's moving into the group stage with our top 9 teams selected or determined in Korea and Japan, and our top 8 in the Asia region. Today, I'm not going to talk about Korea. We have a little bit more time until the Korean matches go underway, so today I'm going to focus on Japan and the Pacific region, and give a little bit more time for the Korean rosters, because those teams are going to have, we already know, tons of really impressive talent from the Overwatch League and beyond, so we're going to talk just about Japan and Asia Pacific today. So, let's begin with Japan. As you can see here, there are 9 teams, and those teams are Six Blow, Arise Project, Namakuji Brothers, Varel, Pandia, Ravati, Insomnia, Hayabusa Gaming, and Niam Gaming, or Niam Gaming. Go here and show those rosters for you. Obviously, this is on Liquipedia. If you know how Liquipedia works, blue name means they have a page, red means they don't. Lots of red names here. Lots of, that's true for the organizations and the players. Japan, of course, is an up-and-coming scene. It's a scene that never really was as big as Korea for a number of reasons. Obviously, Japan is big in some esports, but FPS games have never really been their best. They're pretty good in Valorant, and I think we're starting to see them get a little bit more prominent here in Overwatch. If you've been following contenders back in 2023, if you were following kind of all the open circuits and the spring stage open, the summer stage open, stuff like that, you might recognize one of the teams here. You also might recognize them more if you watched the World Cup, and that, of course, is Varel, this roster right over here. Varel is the team that has been pretty much the top team in Japan for the better part of a year, if not over a year now. They were the top representative out of Japan in those Contenders Opens last year. This roster was also the roster that represented Japan in the Overwatch World Cup that made it into the top 16. And I believe beat France. So, Varel is definitely the team to watch here in Japan. They have been consistently the top team out of the region, like I said, for the best part of a year at this point, and so they are the team to watch out for. But there's some other teams here as well, and the team I want to highlight as kind of the potential number 2 team here is the team that finished technically slightly different team in terms of the players and the names they had. But the team that finished second a few months ago in the Flash Ops tournament here in Japan was the team Insomnia, which formerly was Vesta Crew. But this team, at least parts of it, were the team that finished second in that Flash Ops tournament. Leonopteryx was on that team. Daisy and Undersea were on that team. The only difference now is their support line is different. Blink and Karu were not on the team during that time. They also did not have Mass Dog on the team. So Insomnia, the other team I think to look out for as potentially the second best team when you consider the fact that in that tournament they did finish second. So recent results would have you think that is the next team. And then Six Blow finished third in that tournament. Once again, they are largely the same team. They have a bigger roster now. RRMY, or I don't know if it's Romy or Ermi, and TQQ were the DPS on that roster back then, but they now add Do, the Korean DPS player, to the team. They only had one tank in that tournament with Max. Now they add the Korean tank in Pressure, and then their support line back then was just APL and Sakume, and so they add Mina as another support player as well. So those two teams, Insomnia and Six Blow, have bulked their rosters up a little bit more, so they're not exactly the same teams as they were in that Flash Ops tournament, but they were the second and third place teams behind Varel. So those, to me, are the three teams that you're going to look out for as potentially being the top three teams in this group. I don't think any of these other teams really competed in that tournament in any kind of major way, so it's a little bit harder to tell. Hayabusa Gaming did actually compete in it. The team is a decent amount different. Jin was the support player in that team, but the other support player is not on the team anymore. So Fregri and Margiela were not on that team. They did not have Bellaboo, the tank player, back then. They did have Action, however, and then their DPS is entirely different. No Varley or Villia back then. So some of these teams have been around for a little bit longer, and you can see obviously that there is moves to add some Korean talent into these teams. You know, Six Below added 2 Korean players. Insomnia added 2 Korean players. You know, Ravati here has a couple Korean players. Pandia has 2 Korean players. Arise has 2 Korean players. Hayabusa has 2 Korean players. So Varel is definitely the team to look out for. As if you're talking about a team of just Japanese players, the best players from Japan, it's Varel. And I think they still have the advantage here. You know, a lot of these Korean players that are in this region are not the best in the world. Most of the best players out of Korea are going to stay in Korea, or some of them even went to North America, because it's just more viable there. You're going to most likely be on better teams there than you would be playing in Japan. But there's still reason to play in Japan, because if you're not going to get a spot on a Korean roster, you may as well take a spot on a Japanese roster if that's how you want to play. But I think Varel is absolutely still the favorite in Japan. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens between Six Below and Insomnia. They're the 2 teams to watch out for. There are 3 teams that technically advance out of this round. The third team gets a spot, if you can see up here, in the wild card. So being the 1 and the 2 will automatically qualify you to the Asia Stage 1, which is, of course, the LAN in Korea, where the top 2 teams from Asia or Pacific and Japan and the top 3 teams from Korea all meet alongside, I believe, 1 single wild card team from the other regions. So it'll most likely be 4 Korean teams, 2 Japanese teams, and 2 Pacific teams. So I suspect Varel will be the top seed out of this. And like I said, Insomnia and Six Below will be fighting for that number 2 spot. The other one will probably be the team that finishes in that wild card spot. Obviously, as you can see, there was an LCQ that happened to get these 4 teams on here. I don't know which group Insomnia played in. The information is not as easy to find as you would want it to be. It's just everything is so open at this point in time that it's a little difficult. I believe there was a post about it on Reddit somewhere that I can always try to find it and try to remember. But it is very interesting to kind of look at this region. I think Japan, to me, of the 2 regions we're talking about today, I find Japan to be way more fascinating, because I think Japan is a little bit more... It's getting closer to where I think we want to see the esports scene grow, and I think it is way closer to where the actual growth of the esport is going. I think that it is most likely going to be closer to this with Japan, and Japan is a scene that I think will just continue to grow with time in ways that is going to be really nice to see. It's one of the reasons why I'm very excited about the OWCS, is because we're going to see the growth in regions like Japan and South America, and even Asia Pacific, which have been kind of neglected for a while. They've never really had, or at least for some time, they've kind of been ignored in more ways than you would want to see. And so it's nice to see them get actual kind of benefits and actually get put in a place that's really good to see, because it's tough to see all of the regions kind of just be bad, if that makes sense. It just, you want to see teams do well. You want to see teams have that really good infrastructure to actually succeed. And I still think look, it's going to be a long time, I think, before Japan is able to really compete with top-end Korea. And it may never happen. But I think the fact that we have at least this many teams and we're seeing the competition where they're going to be playing against players from Korea and players from Asia Pacific, and you're going to get way more actual cross-region play. You're going to get more exposure to some of these top-end players and top-end talent in a LAN situation, in a LAN kind of environment. I think that will help a lot. So that's what I'm excited about with this Japan section and with this Japan thing. It'll be very interesting to see how things go. I really like what we have with this kind of just level of talent. I'm kind of glad that we get to see Japan and Asia Pacific also play first when compared to Korea, because one, I think it gives Korea that stage that they they're going to be playing on land, so it makes more sense. They have to travel a little bit more. There's a little more involved there. And the teams from Japan and Asia will have to then also travel to Korea once they've qualified and all that. But I do think it's good to kind of get to see these teams first, because then they get to really have that extra time to really get themselves ready. They get to scrim against Korean teams. They get to watch Korean teams play, and I think that will be a really cool thing to see. So that's the Japanese rosters here. Like I said, I don't know a lot about all of these players. There's a lot of players here that we just don't have a lot of history with as a general scene. I haven't followed Japan very closely. It's a relatively young scene in terms of kind of getting to this high-level play. One player from Japan has ever made it to the Overwatch League, for example, so it's not a scene that is massive in that way. But it's got a lot of really interesting talent. It's got a lot of up-and-coming talent, and I think their show in the World Cup, to me, was one of the most exciting ones, because it was a team that really has kind of been one of the new guard coming in and getting bigger, beating France, who were in some ways like the old guard. France was a historic, great country in the Overwatch World Cup. They were the first team to ever take a map basically off of South Korea. Like, they were one of the first teams to really push South Korea. And so it's good to see now that we're seeing this kind of shift, and the rise of countries like Japan is a really nice way to really show that. But we talked enough about Japan. Let's talk now about the rest of the teams that we're going to be seeing here. This is the Asia region, or the Pacific region. I keep saying the Asia region. This is all the Asia region. This is the Pacific region. 8 teams in this region. We have RTFM, DAF, Teenage Rising, Fade Altair, Honeypot, Personate Gang, Far East Society, and Wenjo Uye. Or Uye. Interesting teams here. Some of these names you might recognize. DAF, Far East Society, Honeypot, a little more prominent in recent tournaments. Honeypot, of course, historically an Australian organization, an Australian roster, so their team is not going to be predominantly Australian anymore because of the rules with the OWCS, which I could make a whole video just on my thoughts on that. But let's take a look at the players on these rosters, and I will share my thoughts. So, obviously, with the way the Pacific group works, there's a lot more openness in terms of the types of players you can sign. They can be from Thailand, they can be from Singapore, from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Indonesia. You know, there's a bunch of different places that they can be from. So that's why you have so many more flags here and a lot more interesting things here. But here are your teams. I think it's an interesting group to look at here. I think Japan is much more... I think Japan is easier to predict. I think you look at Japan, Vero should get out of that group as the top team. I'd be shocked if they weren't even top. If they weren't top 3, I'd be amazed. I wouldn't be shocked if they finished second instead of first. But they should be the best team out of Japan. Here, I think it's a little bit more open, and then there's a little bit more questions about what happens here, because this is a very interesting region. DAF and Honeypot, like I said, are 2 teams you might recognize. They were pretty good. They were both teams that had a decent amount of success in contenders last year. They were some of the teams that were making it to those open, summer stage opens, stuff like that. But the teams are so different now, it's very difficult to look at them the same way that we did back then. But they're still pretty good, and there's still a lot of things to look at here in terms of talent. A lot of these teams are still around that participated in some of the more recent tournaments. Go back to that Flash Ops tournament like I mentioned with Japan. DAF was in that tournament, and they were the team that won in this APAC or Southeast Asia region then. Teenage Rising, they were also there. They were another team that participated then. Mostly the same roster. Fusafast and NS still with the team. They don't have their other support, who was someone by the name of Melu. Now they have Before Yadare or Bay. Look, numbers, I hate numbers and names, all right? Sometimes these names, they just get really weird, all right? And then their DPS is entirely different as well. So they have a couple of the same pieces, but they do have a lot of changes. DAF has some changes as well. Interesting point. In the tournament, the Holiday Showdown, they had SGY or Soggy as their DPS, who you can now see has moved over to Honeypot. So there's some changes, right? Honeypot comes in. They're a team that established themselves quite well in the Australian region. If you remember, they were one of the teams that actually they were the best team in Australia in the spring and summer stages, and had a pretty good run in that summer stage open to be one of the top teams in the that tournament, even beating out some of the Korean talent and Korean teams, if I remember correctly. DAF also had a pretty good run there. I think these teams, obviously they're different now. Honeypot has had to change their roster quite a bit. I believe Nyang and Adam are the only two pieces that have carried over. They had to make a lot of changes, bringing in a bunch of players who were not obviously on this team before. I believe SGY, Overshake, and Kame were all supposed to be on the World Cup team for Singapore that then blew up. And then those three I don't think were. So they're all very good players. They're all really talented players. And then you have Light as the support player. So I think that DAF and Honeypot are potentially better overall than Varel. Varel did not do very well in contenders. So I think this scene might be a little bit better, or at least they have more kind of super teams that are a little bit more talented. But it's tough to know for sure how this is going to be. And with this region having, once again, 2 spots and then a third wildcard spot, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But I feel pretty good that DAF and Honeypot are the top 2 teams in this group. I just think that they have way more success as organizations. Honeypot is a big question mark because they are not the exact same Honeypot that has done well recently. But I think Nyang and Adam have been very good players for a while now, and they were very big parts of that Australia success, and they were very big parts of the success for this team in the kind of open circuits as well. And I think they bring in some very good players like SGY, and I think they have put themselves in a pretty good position. But I think DAF, the fact that they are a pretty well-built team that have been around for a long time, they've been one of the best teams. A lot of these players were also on Team Thailand in the World Cup. Obviously, Clear and Dank and Lumi were not, but I believe Ace High Vision, Pei and iBang were all on Team Thailand. So this is a very solid roster that has a lot of kind of success behind them. But this scene, to me, this is the group that is fascinatingly interesting to me, because there are just so many variables and things that are a little bit harder to really kind of put my fingers around because I'm not as familiar with these scenes. Obviously, you look at teams like Fade Altair and Personate Gaming and DAF, and there's a lot of Thai talent, and even Teenage Rising has a lot of Thai players. But then you have teams like Far East Society, where it's a mix. You have a couple of Korean players, you got a Taiwanese player, you got some Singaporean players. That's Singapore, right? I'm not an idiot, right? That's Indonesia. I'm stupid. This is Singapore. This is Indonesia. So you got, he's Indonesian, he's Singaporean. Okay, that's why. All right, I feel better. But these rosters, you have a mix of players from a lot of different countries, a lot of different places, that it makes it very interesting to see how this all will work out at the end of the day, because it's not like Japan, where I think you can look at Japan and you can just go, Varel is the team that is basically a Japanese super team. It is the best players from all over Japan, basically. That team should be able to win and should be pretty good. Here, you got players from multiple different countries, and so you can look and say, look, we're good, but we want to bring in a guy like Dank if we're DAF because he's just better than what we're going to get from tank play here, right? I think most of the top teams in this region are ones who probably are going the route of non-Thai tank players, which is interesting. I've never been. I'm not really aware of what the tank scene is like in Thai, but in Thailand. But Dank and Clear for DAF, an Australian and an American. Honeypot with Adam, he's an Australian. RTFM, they don't have many Thai players. They don't have any of them. But they have Ruler. Far East Society got no Thai players. So it's an interesting thing just to look at. I'm kind of curious to see how these teams do. But I think it'll be fun to watch this group and Japan for me, just to kind of see what's going on, right? Like, these are scenes I'm not nearly as familiar with. I don't know these players very well. I recognize and I'm aware of the players in DAF and Honeypot because I've seen them. They've been around a bit more. They've had some more success internationally and outside of these specific regions. But it's always interesting because you always have scenes, and this is a thing in the World Cup as well, where you have players who are super well known within their own country because they're really good players. They've been successful in scenes that I just don't know nearly enough about because of a lack of investment and all this other stuff. So I'm really interested to see this region in particular because it is so diverse in terms of the amount of players from different places in the world. Specifically, of course, Southeast Asia. I'm just curious to see what this team does this group does because it's very interesting. It's very unique in the way that it is just built up of players from a bunch of different countries. So I'm curious. It's interesting. I really like what we're getting with the OWCS in terms of the amount of diversity we're getting in terms of teams. I have problems with the format. We haven't gotten really into it yet, so I'm gonna reserve judgment, I think, until after the first LAN event in Dallas. I think after that, I will be able to give more of my thoughts on how I feel about the state of the esport. But at the very least, looking at the teams from Japan and this Pacific region, I'm very excited. I'm really interested to see where things go from here. I want to see these teams compete. I think it'll be interesting to see the wild card, right? Like, how does the fourth best team in Korea compare to the third best teams in Japan and Pacific, right? Probably pretty easy for the team from Korea, but I'm just very curious to see where the scene in general is, and how much better by the end of the year, let's say, will Japan and Pacific, Asia in general be than it is now. Because I think it's the kind of thing where when you talk about North America, right, like little mini tangent here, but part of what helped North America so much over the past several years grow and develop as a scene is that when the Overwatch League was on, there was this influx of really, really high-end Korean talent and Korean coaches coming into North America, playing on North American servers, scrimming North American teams, because those are the teams that you can scrim against the most easily if you're not scrimming against Overwatch League teams. And that helped the scene develop in a way that really kind of helps them. And it's why I think, generally speaking, people view North America as an overall more competitive scene than, say, Europe right now, which really has been kind of more so losing its high-end talent because most of the best players in Europe would leave to then go to North America. And that's why a team like, I think, Saudi Arabia is able to get as good as they are, because they're able to develop their style and stuff in kind of a bubble in a lot of ways. And a lot of the really high-end talent from other parts of Europe are just gone, and the talent that was developing in Saudi Arabia was not really being poached or leached, and so they were able to just kind of continue to grow and get better and better and better, plus the investment of money, but that's a whole other conversation. And so I think that's part of what's interesting about these scenes, is now that Japan and Asia Pacific are going to be regularly competing against Korean teams, and there's going to be an influx of players, most likely still, we're seeing it already, but as teams in Japan do well and consistently do well, there's a higher likelihood that they're able to bring in a couple of Korean players as an import or a couple of Korean coaches to help them bolster up their team and get better, because they know that they're getting closer and closer and closer. So that's what I'm excited about, right? The more we get cross-region competition, I think the better the world gets. The more that you get to inject players from other parts of the world into other scenes, it really helps build up and understand, build up understanding of the game and make the scene better as a whole. So, little mini tangent just to kind of say that I'm very excited for where we're going with the OWCS, and I'm excited to see what comes next. But that is going to be all for me for today. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on anything I talked about today. Is there a team that I talked about you're particularly excited about? Is there anything that I didn't talk about that you wish I did? Is there a team here that you're more familiar with than I am that you want to shout out and talk about them a little bit more? Let me know in the comments down below. Like I said in some of my earlier videos, this is definitely going to be a much harder scene to follow every single game in the way that I did with the Overwatch League. So I'm always open to listening and hearing what people have to say about some of the overall things that are going on and some of the things that I may miss. So that's something I'm always appreciative for. And if you are able to let me know more and help me out, that is always awesome. But that's going to be all for me for today. So thank you all once again. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing, as your support does help out a lot with the channel. But I'm going to get out of here. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.